starting from humble beginnings. You know, our first foray was with Winston Stewart from TFS. He was a head boy at KC, civil engineer graduate, and he went on to become a geotechnical engineer, graduated in 1976. Then our second interviewee, the grub master Barton Clark from Barbados, and he graduated in 1975 and made significant input into the region, Tahoe, Cardi, etc. And then we went to Trinidad. We spoke to the mathematician Fayed Ali, who graduated in 1976, an entrepreneur, and he has made a tremendous regional contribution in education. And it occurred to me that we have interviewed 3 South Block, 1 from top floor south, 2 from ground floor south, and we haven't gone to the North Block yet. So to compensate, we go further north, and we speak to someone from Trinity, Marilyn Headley, who graduated in 1976. So without further ado, we'll just introduce Marilyn. Marilyn, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nuts, Ian. Nice to be one of your interviewees.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, a lot of us, we have a lot to be thankful for. Our region have invested a lot in our education. You and people like Barton and Fayed have stayed within the region and made your contributions within the region. And it is, you know, for someone young starting out now to look to you, someone who started life in Darliston and traverse. We want to look at your trajectory, your life's trajectory, and the hope and the promise that brings. So, Marilyn, just give us an insight into your early life and your early family life.
Well, as you mentioned, thank you. As you said, started off in Darliston, which has no light now after Melissa, still 6 months after. Yes, my parents were my father was from Lamsriver, my mother's from Darliston. I was born in Darliston, grew up there for a little while, didn't stay there for long, because my father used to work with the Public Works Department. Then he joined the police force and was transferred to Kingston. So after a little while, we all moved to Kingston. So it's about 3 or 4, I think it's 3. We moved to Kingston and we lived in Kingston and John's Lane, just coming off East Queen Street, and Duke Street is across the road. And then I started going to St. Joseph Infant School. That was early days. I can remember the first day of school because my sister, who's a few years older than me, she was going to the primary school. And the first day I got there and she left me by this door with some multiple people and children and went off to her class. And I just sat there and bawled, like, where is she? Where's she gone? And then a teacher came out and saw me and held me by the hand and carried me inside the room and said, well, in here, not so bad, it's nice. So that was my first day at school. You're coming from country, you don't know what is happening, this is town. But it was nice. So I went to St. Joseph Infant School and the primary school, and then did, as we know it then, common entrance, did scholarship there. Those were, I like the days of my early life in that you remember them even now. We were on Duke Street. There were little things like when Parliament was going on, you came to the fence and watched them walking up Buster Manton and walking up to Garden House. It was very interesting days. And stayed there, did scholarship, and then went to Holy Child High School, which is where I did my secondary education. And life at Holy Child High School it's been great. I mean, most times when you dream, you're at school. And we have a group from our first form days from 1964 that we sort of reminisce and think about it. We've known each other for 62 years. And we sort of think back to life as it was then. I don't know. I would say life, as you know, was simpler, seemed easier. I suppose because we didn't have the responsibilities. But it also shaped you into what you're going to do, where you're going. There are like a lot of ground rules. Like to this day, you don't see me eating a patty or ice cream on the road. because sister said that isn't done. Ladies don't do their
I,
things.
I, I met
Certainly.
Sister Stephanie. I met Sister Stephanie, and
Oh,
even
yeah.
me, in my adult years, you could see the force behind that little lady, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that short lady. I mean,
Yeah.
I know persons who I went to school with, and I said, we're going on to look at sister. They said, what? I'm not going. I said, what up? I said, afraid of sister. I said, you're an adult. How can you still be afraid of sister? She said, you're going by yourself. I'm not going. But I found that as an adult, she was a different person when you're talking to her. But when you're at school, there are just things you don't do. Ladies don't run down the corridor. We don't sit with our legs crossed like men. You must always cross them at the ankle. But those things I find are the sort of grown rules that stay with you until now. I'm in my early 70s, and there are some things that you just don't do. And it also gives you a lot of social graces that you find sometimes are lacking now. You know what I mean? But it was a sort of thing that molded you and guided you. It's an all-girl Catholic school. So, there are lots of things that were not allowed and didn't do. But we had a good life. We had a good life.
Anybody who knew you from St. Augustine, you know the two Marlins.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that is a lifelong friendship.
Yeah, Marilyn and I met when we were in sixth form. We were first form. We were the last of the first forms that went to school in January. Okay. We went to school the 6th of January, 1964. And you spent 2 terms, and by September 1964, we were in second form. So I met Marilyn Clark, as she was known then. And we have been friends up until this day. I had a friend, when I went to Holy Child first at St. Joseph, I got a half scholarship. And instead of doing it over at St. Joseph, because I was still young, my father said, you could come to the Holy Child High School, and they had a class to just concentrate on doing your scholarship exam, and you learn other things. And another friend who I met then, Alcia Martin, and she's still my friend. She lives in Texas, and we are still really, really good friends. So you meet these people, you make friends. And Marilyn and I, we went to Mona, we said we're going to St. Augustine. As you say, everybody knows the two Marilyns. Yes. She also did agriculture, and then she ended up worked at Appleton, and then she went into teaching afterwards, and then she retired. So really, 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 really good friends.
Yeah. Well, your story really is your work.
I live.
I want to go chronologically. I want to move through to UWI now. Yes. So let's go to the UWI aspect of your life.
Yeah. The UWI. Okay. So at Holy Child, I concentrated more on the science subjects. In those days, when you reach the 3rd or 4th form, they said you have to choose. Yeah. So you all did maths and English and Spanish. Yeah. But then you choose between some of the arts like history and geography. And I was in the science stream because, in your mind, you're really going to be a doctor. And, in those days, everybody's going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Went through, focused on the sciences, went to 6th form. You did maths and zoology and botany, and got the maths in A level. Went to UWI and did the natural science courses. And sitting there, you're doing natural science courses, and you're thinking ahead, and you said, what am I going to do when I leave UWI? And like about 3 or 4 hours, I would say, teaching. I said, really, I don't really like teaching. I don't like the chalk dust. And we started thinking, what else can we do? So, you went up to the registry, you got some books. What else do UWI offer? And then we saw agriculture and engineering. Physics wasn't the best. We're just kind of pankering with the physics. And we said, we can do agriculture. We have everything that you can do agriculture. And decided we're going to St. Augustine to do agriculture. And applied and got through. And we're going down to St. Augustine. So Marilyn and I said we are going to shift from just doing straight sciences to go out and teach, to more focus on something that we can come out and do. Well, back to school now. So, you're changing universities. So we went back to school to tell Sister Stephanie. She said, what are you going to do? She said, agriculture, sister. She said, farming? I said, sister, agriculture. She said, okay. God go with you. And, she blessed us and we went off to St. Augustine and did. And just a little fast forwarding. I remember now being working at forestry and I got a call from Holy Child. They having career day. And they want me to speak to the students about my career path. And I reached and I said, this is the same school where sister asked me, you're going to do agriculture. I told the girls, I said, things have changed so much since we left school. You now have an option that we never heard about before. You can come out and do some other things besides teaching and just go work in a bank. You can come and do agriculture. And they're looking at you and I said, yeah. And I said, look at the amazement. Look at how things have changed. You have so much more options. So that is when you branch out, you then have to do it yourself and kind of lead the way.
You were a head girl as well, weren't you?
Oh yes. I was head girl at all the time for 1970. That's an experience. Because I find when you're in sixth form, when you're at school and up to fifth form, you're like a regular student. And you come to sixth form and you're a big girl. You're in upper six and you're in charge. You know what I mean? And you have students who are bowing and nodding to you and moving one side when you're passing. You're head girl. And
you thought you're in the Oval Office?
Huh?
You thought you're in the Oval Office?
Yeah, there's this feeling that you get that you really have reached to a point where you are doing things that others are watching and doing, and sister, they'll leave the class with you. Teacher's not there, they would send the prefect or the head girl. So I think that year as head girl was pivotal. I remember fast forwarding to forest department. I was working with Guy Symes, as you know, and we're in the manager's meeting. And he was building, and nowadays they call it succession planning. But I think he was just building and said, well, give everybody a chance to be in charge of the meeting at 1 month. So 1 month I got the meeting to be in charge of, and I'm brand new. So I'm in charge of the meeting. And they're asking, Marilyn, how do you know that? I said, listen to me. When I was in school, I was in charge of the school for 1 year. I was head girl. So I must know how to manage a meeting here with all men, remember. Like forestry, no other women in there. And it really built you up so that you can do things. And they were like amazed. How do you know that? How do you do that? But from head girl now, the thing I found now, from head girl to first year at UWI was like a step down. Because now you're like a new student. Who are you? Everybody else is senior. When you reach a St. Augustine, they're calling you grub and grubette and things like that. That was a major step down, and that took a while to process, to know that you who used to be head of everything is now subject to some person or persons. But then it built another set of characters in you. So you will know, no, this is how I manage that. This is how I manage that. And by the second year, both Marilyn and I were big grubbers because we now had privilege, having gone through the process. Because how we got to that privilege, we were unfortunately on the same bus with all the new grubs going into Canada Hall. And Trinity Hall was brand new then, and nobody knew Trinity Hall. The bus driver who was taking us didn't know there was a Trinity Hall, so he let off all of us over Canada Hall. So Marilyn and I were in that grub line being grubbed by the likes of Winston Cameron and the rest of them for one whole night. Relentless. Until it dawned on them how we're going to get them over to Trinity Hall. By the time we reached over there, the warden was fast asleep. That to knock and wake her up early in the morning. She just kept us down there in her quarters, and we slept there for the morning, for the night, into the next morning. And you wake up and say, what was that? What happened? And it's really, but again, it cut down some bridges, it built some character, it then put you in a spot that said, I can do this, I'm in the same boat with you. So we then had privileges. So like when next year and the next bus come, we could grow because we did that the year before.
Well, just for the record, I got cut off there for a while, but
yes, we want this one.
We continue. So I guess I missed I was going to ask you the process. What was the process to select the head girl at Holy Child? Was it
at that time, the headmistress and the teachers did it.
Okay.
The headmistress and the teachers did, because I remember when we were graduating, those days you finished fifth form, did O-levels, and the graduation was actually during your first year in sixth form. It was later down in the year. And the person who was selected as a valedictorian wasn't well. She had similar problems to Jackie, but milder and earlier, just was under stress. And, sister was asked in her room, say, would you like to give the valedictory speech? And we sat and thought about it and said, yes, I could do that. But, some persons were better talkers then. And she kind of said, we're like hoping you would do it because, you're like have the potential to. You know what I mean? Yes. So, like they were picking the head girl from before. So like when you're in sixth form, they're kind of looking at it. So it's actually the deputy headmistress was speaking to me. So it's a headmistress and a deputy headmistress. In sixth form, the lower six, you get prefects and sub-prefects. So I suppose from that, they then decide who is going to be head girl and deputy. And they also put in the academics also in it.
Yeah. So, all right. So fast forward now to UWI, St. Augustine. Yeah. What was who was significant to your agricultural education at UWI?
At St. Augustine?
Yes.
That's 50 odd years ago, right? Not? Right. And
by the way, will you be in Trinidad for the anniversary end of this year?
I don't know. You mean the gathering? I was going to the one for the 40th, and it just happened that I had to do a trip, climate change COP meeting, like the week after, to go to Marrakesh.
Morocco.
And yes, in Morocco. And that's the same year also I got to meet the Queen because we had some forestry activity, Commonwealth Forestry.
You mean Queen Elizabeth?
Elizabeth. Yeah, man.
Yes.
Because when Steve started planning, the group was like about 8. And we're part of it because, that group actually started when Steve's sister died, Nidhi. And we're at the repass. And the decent people have gone home. And the rest of us are around a table, of St. Augustine types, and the Joneses were there, myself, Marilyn, Bev, and we're just into the evening chatting. And them said, well, we really must meet up as we're 40 coming up and, really must start think about it. And we started chatting about it, and then they started to form the group. It was an email group, and then it moved from email group to a WhatsApp group. And then the group just started to grow and grow and grow. And you have it now, you're 100 and odd persons on this VH.
Yes.
That's how come when they said it's Hermits and Gog, Bev and I and Marilyn were one of the first 2 members of that group. We're one of the first 2 members of that group. Yeah. So I was planning to do that. All set and ready. And they shifted the date. It was supposed to be around Heroes Weekend in Jamaica. And they shifted it to late October, and I had to go to Morocco the first week of November. So I missed it.
Well, we can't just brush past the Queen, so, we have to get some more about the Queen, man. How was that?
Queen? Yeah, you want me to do the Queen now or catch up with her? We do the Queen now?
Yeah, man, do the Queen, man.
All right. The Queen was 90, wrong about that time. So she's head of the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth persons proposed that we should have some a forest canopy in different Commonwealth countries dedicated to the Queen. So, they sent out the invitation. I'm still a member of the Commonwealth Forestry Association. So I was a director. So they sent out the invitation, and I said to my guys, we can do this. They look at me blank. Said, we have so much forest in Jamaica. All we need to do is just identify one, tick off the requirements and said, that's it. So we picked a forest out in Hanover named Dolphin Head Forest, near to a town named Ashkinish. I don't know if you two guys know the parts of the world. You know, in Ashkinish, right? You're going.
You have an airport near there? You have an airport near there?
You're in Hanover now, man. You pass Lucy, you're going on to Green like a Palladium Hotel, and you make left go up the hill. And we had a forest up there, but it just wasn't a forest. We also had a local forest management committee active there. Local forest management committees are groups that you formulate in established by the Forest Department. It's part of our act, actually, that said you must bring the community involved in the program. And this community group started off as a bunch of Rasta guys who supply ganja in the forest. So we started talking with them and saying that you could shift from ganja to something else, and you could still use part of the forest, and we managed to get through to them. There was a person down there doing some work with bamboo, making chairs and stuff, and she got through to them too. So we formed the group. So it covered then that there was a forest, but it wasn't detached from people. We had a community group, and that was one of the criteria. So we went to work, wrote up all the stuff, sent in the pictures and the information. And then they wrote back and said, yes, Jamaica is selected. You're in the canopy, the Queen's Commonwealth canopy. So we said, good, we clap hands. Then one day, we got this fancy piece of invitation embossed and thing saying you're invited to come to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen. They've selected 3 countries, Jamaica, Malawi, and England, to come as a representative of the Commonwealth Forestry Canopy Forests. So we looked around, and the chief accountant said, yes, we got to find money, you're going. Then it just happened that it was in the week that we had the climate change meeting in Morocco. So I agreed, I got to Morocco, be there, booked the ticket flight from Marrakesh to London, stayed with my cousin one night. No, actually didn't stay because we had hotel things, and stayed there. And then went to Buckingham Palace. And now that is something else, because you actually get to meet the Queen. So when before I was going, the Foreign Affairs Minister, she's still Foreign Affairs Minister, she came and was having a chat with us because the Prime Minister was coming 2 days after. So she said, Marilyn, can meet with me? I said, nope, I'm going to see the Queen. She said, going to see who? The Queen, Elizabeth. She said, okay, my dear. So you went. Reach airport in England. You reach the customs man, immigration man. What does he ask you? Why are you here? So I said, I'm going to meet the Queen. I mean, all my years of travel. That's the best line. He looked up. You're going to the one? I said, I'm going to meet the Queen. You're going to be meeting with the Queen? Yes, I'm going to be meeting with the Queen. Quiet. Look at him, because I have the invitation just in case he's going to do it.
Yeah.
He said, you have a meeting? I said, yes, I'm in the Forest Department in Jamaica. We have a forest, it's a common forest, and the Queen has invited me to the Buckingham Palace. He said, okay, ma'am, have a good trip.
So you never had to show him your invitation?
No, and my question, I was going to ask him, have you met the Queen? But you know, he picked up really nice and moved on, because that was going to be my next question. Have you met the Queen? That was like the immigration visit of your lifetime.
Oh,
when you get the immigration officer, you can do what I'm going to do, because I am going to meet the Queen. So the drive up now, the High Commission office picks you up, and we get to Buckingham Palace, and you're properly dressed in your nice clothes. But then you go in, opulence. It really, I mean, you've known about this since you were a year high. Queen Elizabeth and Buckingham Palace, and you do this, you see people doing the tours and things. And I've been to England before, because when I went to Oxford, you could go down by Buckingham, you do the outside tour and things like that. But going inside and then really just seeing everything. And the good thing though is that these were all mainly forestry people. So they had persons from the Oxford Forestry Institute, and those you know, because when I was up there, so you kind of had company people, you know. And when they introduced us to the Queen, so you first go up the Queen and the Duke, and then they go in and have a nice presentation. And then we had displays. And she then come around to each of those 3 countries. And I got stuff that we sent up, like honey from the local groups were there. The High Commission brought coffee and other things, and we had some books. We select things that were there. And then you explain all of that to the Queen. So like I told her when I went back to Marrakesh, the Queen was right here. So y'all can touch my shoulder for our money. The Queen was right here. We call each other Lizzie and Mary. So that's really, you got this chance to put Jamaica literally on the map. Yeah, literally on the map. David Attenborough.
So you have any idea how they chose Jamaica?
I think they like the idea of the combination, you know, of the forest accessible to people, but still a real natural forest. Right? He even has some what you call primary forest, we call closed broadleaf forest. The combination, because we send them pictures of people producing, because I think when you encourage with local forest management communities is sustainability. So you try and find livelihoods that they can manage, that they can do, so they will earn as a group, and honey making was their thing. So, and I think, you know, generally back up everybody.
Is what? Is logwood honey that they make?
Huh? What's that?
Is logwood honey? What kind of honey? Logwood?
It's not just logwood, they're multiflora, because they were using mainly the trees in the forest. So it wasn't just logwood. It was a multiflora honey. And I'm saying that basically in the back of everybody mind in the world, Jamaica just comes up to you as you open your mouth. And you have a choice, you're going to say Jamaica.
No, but that's really an amazing story.
It is. And then
that's an amazing.
After meeting with just the Queen, because that was like a cutoff in a room with just the 3 countries exhibiting, and a small, like I said, the other amazing person to meet was David Attenborough. He's the same age as the Queen. He was 90 at that time. And, you know, his head is something that when he dies, I must take out the brain and put one side. Also met Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister then.
He was mayor of London at the time?
No, it was more than that, like foreign affairs. He was an MP with a cabinet position. And here was just flying and he's loud. Yeah, and he was actually at the UK booth. He was actually at the UK booth. Like we had me and the person from the High Commission at our booth.
What year was that? What year was that?
2016. At the same time, they all went to St. Augustine. 2016. This is November 2016. I must send you a picture.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see that.
And then
now I know, because we kind of we jump from Marrakesh and thing. We miss out on the chronology, you know.
The chronology.
So the question is, from St. Augustine, who was impactful in your training as an agriculturalist?
Yes, I mean, we had persons who tell you things that still stuck in there. Professor Cope, he did the statistics and the genetics. So, you know, to this day, we still talk about T1 and T2 and why you are tall and why you are short and why you look like your father and why you don't look like so and so and all of that. Hope taught the genetics course. And at that time, you know, when you were in engineering and agriculture, we did work by semester. So, you know, we did a term's work, you got exam in December, a term work, you got exam Easter, and then we did the last term and got exam in June. But with Cope's course, it was one of the few that went from October straight to June. So it was really thing. And the statistics, because I remember between the genetics and the learning, like Queen Victoria and her husband, and who was hemophiliac and who wasn't, you get a lot of that. The statistics was always key. You learn a lot of statistics, and that stuck in me. I can remember we went to Oxford, and you have a statistics course, and you are going through it. Professor Spence, he did botany. You know, that he was also good. And there's another guy from Africa, I can't remember his name.
Doc Ahmad never impacted you as a lecturer down there?
No, not much. We didn't do many courses with Ahmad. Didn't do many courses with Ahmad. But there's another guy named Cook, I think. I can't remember his name, who was very good too. And what I liked with Cockpit, I remember Professor Spence would tell us, and you were saying, Why I didn't get to come to school today, he would just wave his finger. You are no longer in school. You are at the University of the West Indies. So stop saying you are in school. Yeah. But it's stuck in your head to know that, well, this is not your school days. This is where you are responsible for what you have to do. It is full-time university work. And the influence you got are like the field trips. Field trips were really deep and really put you out there in the field to know what's happening. In Trinidad, but similar things happening in Jamaica. One thing we learned on those field trips is that Trinidad have a lot of snakes, and the Jamaicans don't really like it. So when we were on the field trip, one time we were out on the orange orchard, and there was a big yellow snake in one tree going across the other tree. Didn't affect us much, because when we're going there, we're talking about the area. And one of the Trinidadians said, we have 1 or 2 snakes out here. Well, from Jamaicans heard that, not one Jamaican come off that bus on that field trip. We did that field trip through the window. Even big man like Bucka Jones. You say, big and afraid or not. Strengthen them, man, and them afraid or not. And we there. And so said, so done. While we were there, we saw this yellow snake going across. It just went, when it went to cross to the next tree, it just went straight, ramrod straight, and step over to the other tree. And everybody started to scream. And the girl then said, "In Jamaica, them afraid." Bucka said, "Yes, we're afraid. We don't have those things in Jamaica, and we don't intend to find them. But they're not going to poison you." So we won't know, because they're not going to like us. We are never going to know. Yes. But those were interesting, things that you went out in the field and did a lot of work. And then we also, if you never went to JSA, Jamaica School of Agriculture, you had to come back to Jamaica after the first year and do 6 weeks of practical training at JSA. And the ones who left from either high school or not done any agriculture before, in Trinidad stayed and they did it down there. But in Jamaica, we all came up to, so a bunch of us, Benji and Marilyn and Bev and ourselves, we were all up here out at JSA Twickenham Park for the first half of your summer and did practical agriculture, wake up and milk cow and collect eggs and stuff like that. So you really got so much in. And then you got to meet the lecturers at JSA. And I have a feeling that's when we met Joe Sue, because they used to have guest lecturers come in. Roy Jones used to come from the forest department, and he was the director of forest. Yeah. He was a deputy at the time. So you got to meet that. You really got underground feeling of what it is. I specialize in agronomy. I wasn't in a livestock plot, so an agronomist, and decided that is my area of like. So you just stuck with the plants. And then at the year before we left, holiday work, right? I usually come home and do holiday work. Always had a holiday work. And before I went to St. Augustine, I worked at Mazookas. You remember that story, Ian?
Yeah, man, I remember Mazookas. That was, yes.
Work in accounts department, because, it's work. And my father knew one of the men down there. So as soon as you get holiday, you just pack up yourself and then cut down and you're working. So Mr. Them days, when you're younger and senior secretaries just tell you to do that. So Mr. Mazooka's secretary now just came on. Mr. Mazooka was traveling. So she said, fill up him passport form. Fine, that's not hard. Fill up the form finish, but give it back to her. I don't see her. So we look in the office and Mr. Mazooka called me, John Mazooka. I said, here are your forms. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm university. So I said, I was at Mona. He said, what are you doing? I said, no, I'm at St. Augustine. He said, you're doing agriculture? So I said, yeah. He said, then why are you here? You don't know we have a cut flowers place out in St. Augustine? I said, yes, I know, but this is where I was working accounts. He said, well, next year when you come, you make sure you're out at Albion. 2 things happened. I had a summer job next year, because the boss just said next year when you come, and I was going to work out in horticulture. So next summer, when I come, back to Mazooka, but out at Albion. And the man who was in charge at the time was Larry Sharp, I don't know if you knew him. And the manager, the operation manager was Roddy Daly. And he lived over in Edgewater when we used to live in Independence City. Remember them days when we lived in Independence City? Yeah. So he would drive off from Edgewater, pick me up, and we go to Albion every day. And I worked out there. We did a creeper, what people call creeper, named Pathos. And it would cut up in snippets and export it to Texas, to Houston, where they then pot them out and sell them as potted plants. And that's what we did every day, different types of plants that you send and ship out. And we did that. Interesting things like you're out there and they want lunch. So I'm going out for drive, go to Yalas again. Well, what am I driving? Lorry Sharp Volvo. I remember saying I have my driver's license a long time ago. I have my driver's license.
You're a Reese license?
What? No. I got my driver's license out at stadium. I could drive when I was in school because we lived in Independence City. Our father always did like the idea of having to pick you up and drive you out, so everybody learned to drive early. You understand? So when I went to St. Augustine, I already had my driver's license. So I'm working. I was not one of those who got the license down there. So lunchtime come now and say, who want lunch? We're going, Marilyn, you go buy lunch. I say, yeah, man, but guess what? I'm driving a Volvo S. We learned to drive off a VW. My father always had a VW. And you know the hardest steering wheel to turn is a VW. So when you learn to drive, you can do everything. When you get a Volvo, you take the back of your hand and you're turning it like that. And you say, always wanted to do that. But it then gave you a good workplace to be at. You're out in the field, literally, and you got paid.
Yeah.
And then the following year now, it was the last year before I left, and decided I was going to try out at forestry because somewhere along the line we heard that they were taking people and applied to forestry. Marilyn and Ivan Gunning went up there and got summer jobs up there. But afterwards, Marilyn Ivan went to agriculture and I stayed at forestry for that whole final year. And then as we are about to finish, in those days, Peter, when you're finishing university, look out for a job, you just write and ask people, can I come up by you? And when you're leaving the summer before, you tell them, I'm finishing university next year, June. So I will see you July. And I say, yeah, man, because getting job them time, I say, yeah, come in. And you just went to forestry and got a job, and that's where I started. Yeah. That was in 76.
So how was that? Give me the foray forest department. Was there any misogynism, anything like that?
Any what?
Misogynism,
forestry was interesting. A packed house of men. You had women, secretaries and stuff like that, but all the foresters except one, a young girl, she was a technician. And I had Barbara Graham, who was there when I got there as a senior researcher. So she and I were probably two females in that management group. So, it's always interesting. You learn a lot. You learn to defend a lot. You learn to fight off a lot. You always say, you have to prove yourself. I always tell them, any meeting I'm in and you are sitting beside me, I am brighter than you because you're a man. And they would just take umbrage one time. But it's true. You had to be proven at all times that you really do know what you're saying, that is not just a face, and somebody didn't give you the job because of X or Y. So it really built really strong character. I remember the person in charge of the Moneeg office one time. Big man, real fast. It's like, Nuts big now. Nuts wasn't so big all the way. That's a different Peter. And he just walked into the office. Then there's an open plan. I never call it that, but there was open plan. And even though you're a big professional, you have your desk in front. And he just walked in and make some comment about what he's going to do and understand who them young people are coming now and want to get position and that. And he's saying, he's there for 24 years and I'm working on it. And I said, but I'm 24. So from 1952, people said to myself, so from 1952, you mean the same position? So I said, well, 24 years not catching me sit down beside this desk. You look around and then look down like, who said that? So I looked up and he looked me in the face. He didn't say anything, but it's true. There's no way I've been walking that place and boasting that I'm in this position for 24 years and I've reached. So you really had to be moving in and moving cautiously, but still going. But what I found is that the directors backed you. Keats Hall was in charge at the time. Guy Sands was his deputy, and then there was Roy Jones. Right. So
what's the mandate for this forest department, or it fit into our national program and plan?
Well, the forest department is the entity that is responsible for all government forests. All government forests are owned by the Commissioner of Lands, so they call them state lands. But the forest department manages, conserve, and protects all of that, and also advise on privately owned lands. The majority of the forest in Jamaica is not on government land. So, but the legislation will cover parts of it. So the legislation of our Forest Act had one from 37, and then you had one that just came into being in 96. And I think they are now in the process of just revising that one. But the Forest Act placed the responsibility of all of the forest management in the forest department. So the Blue Mountains are one of our biggest forests. They have about, the last count, about 400 and something thousand hectares of land that you might classify as forests. The government manages, the last count was like 110,000 hectares. So we're like 10% of Jamaica's land cover that is forest is managed by the forest department. So your aim is to ensure that that forest stays intact, number one. None of it does keep it out, lock up in a shop. So you can use it, but what is being used for is also part of the plan. So the forest department will have a management plan. Usually it's a 5-year. We start off with a 5-year, then you renew it, and you review it like halfway through, and then you create another plan. And then it tells you what are the activities that are going to be priority during this period of time. So the main thing is, for example, Blue Mountain and Cockpit. Cockpit was being in the discussion like about 10 years ago when everybody was talking about bauxite mining was going to take place in the Cockpit Country.
I remember that.
And
even on the VH, we had discussions on it.
Huh?
Even on the VH, we had discussions.
Right. And the discussion was like how to mine, what to mine, where to mine. And in same 26, like early 2000s, before the teens, the mining was in agriculture at the time. And the NGOs and the government were quarreling about utilizing Cockpit Country. And the Ministry of Agriculture completely forgot that they were just talking from their mining side. Completely forgot that you had forest department as a department under that ministry. And the forest actually is managed by the forest department. So it is not, you have a discussion with the mining people against the NGOs. So we call the PS and he's like, oh, okay, Marilyn, come the next meeting. So you go to the next meeting. So all the mining people know that, them is God, because them always sell it, they have $1 billion US dollars worth of bauxite ore in the Cockpit Country. So you go to the meeting now and you then introduce a whole new discussion. That is a forest that you cannot replace after you take out that bauxite. So all the mining people now will look down the table and look, who is talking, who is that? So you then tell them, yeah, I'm Marilyn Headley, the Conservator of Forests. And that's a forest. And you can't go in and mine out because you cannot replace a natural forest. You can replace it with a forest, but you will never get back the forest that you have. Cockpit Country provides 40% of the surface water that we utilize. It provides the water over the North Coast. So you have to stop and think about it. It was a major ding-dong battle. We sided with the NGOs, and that never happens. Government offices don't side with NGOs. You and your government people must keep together and fight against NGOs. We couldn't do that. We had to side up with the NGOs. It was a long battle. It took us years, and it's just in recent times, like 2017, that they decided that, yes, They are going to look at it for protection, more protection, because it was protected from 1955 as a forest reserve. And once it's a forest reserve, you need permission. But the Mining Act superseded anything, that activity that takes place underground. So the Commissioner of Mines can give permission to mine under a forest, but you must advise the Conservator of Forests. So they don't need the permission from the Conservator of Forests or the Commissioner of Lands. The Commissioner of Mines had that right. So that is what everybody was fighting about. Because you're having the right to go underground also destroys what's above ground. So I'm telling you, it was a ding-dong battle for years. I mean, mining people, we are friends. And when we're out on the road, we are friends. But once we meet into that meeting, cabinet or other meeting, it was a war. So, and eventually, they did decide that, yes, the boundaries would be that. And Forest Department did the boundaries and said that area is going to be protected, not to be mined for bauxite. So that's one of the legacies that I say, packed.
Well, and we're grateful for that, because, you know, we know what that is all about, you know, the myopic vision, just looking to just today.
Today glory.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, like when people win the lot and then treat them friend to drink something and next month they broke again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how did you now get to Oxford?
Oh, Oxford in its early days. Forestry. We always had British and Commonwealth assistants. So we had some British consultants there. And they offered scholarships every year to either Oxford or Reading. You go to Oxford to do forestry program, and they went to Reading to do the project management program. So in 79, I got accepted. So I went to England. That was the first time I was going to cross the pond, and had a really, really good time at Oxford, just doing forestry research, forestry silviculture. And there now is when Professor Cope's statistics courses just clicked it, because you spent like 1 or 2 days out of every week was a statistics program. You met on that program, you had mainly as a Commonwealth participants. One person was from Costa Rica. So that meant there were just 2 of us on this side of the Atlantic. Most persons were from Africa, we had Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea. And you really got a solid learning program there. And then you had field trips. You had to go to research stations down in the south, on Alice Holt, go to Edinburgh, Scotland, Aberdeen. So you really did a lot of underground work. And then you lived in Oxford, and we used to have a thing now when Friday come, I'm heading to London because my cousins are in London, and you go down to the station and you take your bus going down to Victoria Station, and then you're heading. So as another guy from Kenya and one from Nigeria, they did the same thing. So on a Friday, we would come here with our weekend bags underneath the table. And as soon as the lecturer said, you grab the bag, you have to go and catch the bus. That's going to take you to the station. That's going to take you to London, and you can't miss it. And then you come back up Sunday night and then Monday morning. But when I got there first, you know, it's you alone coming in from Jamaica. You know, the British are. You come off the plane, you must look for a sign that says there's a train going to Victoria Station, and then you take the train from Victoria Station, you take a bus, and it carries you up to Oxford, and then you must look out for somebody from the British Council, and they will tell you where you're going. By the time you reach to your hostel, after traveling from Jamaica, the first time in your life to England, and you reach it, you're just like, I want to go home. I miss your mother, your father, your brother, your sister. And you said, no, this is not me. I want to go home. And you just went to bed and literally just cried. And you wake up the next morning and you look out and you see some people who look like you. You know, they're coming from Africa. And you start to talk. And you go to university and say, oh, this is not bad. It was really a good year.
How long was that? How long did that course last?
It was about 10 months. But you did the entire course. and you integrated yourself into the system. And then you made some more lifelong friends. Because even those lecturers, I told you I saw about 3 of them at the canopy thing when we were at Buckingham Palace. And the people like wonder, oh, you know them, and they're like, you're talking Dr. Woods, Professor Wright. And really, really, really close relationship. And it then built up that whole Commonwealth grouping that you then network.
And that's a postgraduate degree, right? You got a master's.
Yes, yeah. It wasn't a master's. It was a certificate we got. We got a diploma in it. It wasn't a master.
Okay. So after that,
then became the silviculturist. So I was then went back and became the silviculturist at the forest department. Silviculture is the science of management of wood.
Of wood.
Silvi, wood. So like you have the agriculturalists, horticulturists, and they look about the plants. Silviculture is the whole management of the forest.
Okay, very good, very good. So having had that Oxford experience, you went to mine
Oh yes. No, mine was in, I think it's 82. I know for sure. That's when Bev and Steve's daughter Jessica born. I remember that was drama. Yeah, that was 1981. That time it was a full-time course. It wasn't like now where you go up 1 day or 2 days. You're literally residential, but you don't live there. So every day for the next 3 months, that's the only place I did. Really, really good management course. Really, really good management course. It took persons from the civil service from all levels. I don't know if you know Michael Ramsey. He was at St. Augustine with us. He and I were.
Yeah, man, I'm running.
And then you had the head of the airports authority, the PS in this, PS in health, some persons in foreign affairs. So it was a good group. But they were a little older than we were then at the time, because we were still young. This is 82. And I remember back to statistics. That always beat everybody. And the statistics lecturer came and he wasn't doing a good job. So Michael and I made a precedent. Say, if you folks give up part of your lunchtime, we will teach you. And they all agreed. And Michael used to run tutorial class during the lunchtime. And everybody does catch up. But it was really not a good networking thing. You got all the management information now, so you knew how you're going to manage. Because you are now looking to future. Because we know this is 6 years working in government. Start to think, what am I going to do in the next 2 years or 5 years? And management comes into mind. You're moving off from just a straight technician work. So that was crucial. That was crucial. And that was another well spent. And
what was the quality of the program there? You think it was?
It was good. It was actually excellent. 2 things. You didn't have to be sharing your brain at the time. So you weren't like at work doing things and then you spend some time doing some assignment and then go to class. It was full time. It was, I know they don't do it like that anymore, but it was full time. You came to classes every day. Every day. You wrote projects, you did things, you comparisons, they put you into groups. So it was really, really good.
All right, so
I did one after that when I came back to forestry as conservator. That was in early days when I was silviculturist. And I remember when I came back as head of forestry, Carlton Davis had another similar course where he wanted all the new heads and potential new heads to do this mandatory course. It was like Tuesdays and Saturdays. A similar thing, but more advanced. But you were working. You still had an organization to run. So it was more part-time, whereas this one was a full-time management course.
Yeah. So all right.
And you made a bunch more friends. I still have a friend who sits behind me in church, who every now and then will take out a picture. I met her at that management course. She was head of Civil Aviation Authority at the time.
Wow. All right. So I know you had a foray into the JNIP and JAMPO.
Yes. It is when you're working in government. I remember I gave you the story about the forester who told me he was there for 24 years. So, after a while, decide that, well, just You need something else. You need to move up, and these agencies at the time are flat. So there's one head and there's nothing in between, just flat. So after I finished the management course, I wanted to shift to management. So I applied for a position in the at that time you had to go to civil service, not civil service. So the
Services
they were
Commission.
applied for government. Yes, Services Commission. So I applied, and I'm waiting for the interview. And this is the latest comment. But after we send you go to Oxford, go to civil culture, how we are gonna move you? And I'm like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm still in government. I mean, it's not like you're losing me. I just move me from one government entity to the next. But civil culture is how we are gonna move you. And I'm like, I could not understand. I went back to work and I talked with one of the lecturers from the management course. He couldn't understand the logic either. And he said, Marilyn, never mind. More things will come up. You understand? And he called me and pointed out that JNIP was looking for an economic development specialist. So I said, yeah, I can manage that. Went for the interview. And they asked us, they didn't ask it in the same tone. Like, well, why are you leaving that? But they kind of said, so, okay. And then one of them said, but we have an agriculture department where you do that same economic development, but for agriculture. I said, okay, that sounds good. So I didn't get that job, but then they called me when I'm not even thinking about them. Said, they have an opening in the agriculture department for an economic development officer if I'm still interested. And I didn't have to do the interview again because I had done the interview before. So I then decided, yes, this was 8 years on. I can make a shift now to move into something else. And I decided to do that. So I went and told Mr. Jones, that time FIDCO had formed. Because, with forestry in the 70s, they then, like about 78, 79, they shifted the industrial activity out of forestry into creating the Forest Industrial Development Company, FIDCO.
I remember
so
FIDCO.
Forestry, right. Forestry still did the management of forests and the government lands. FIDCO did the industrial thing, had the sawmill. But then research, which is where I was, and one other group worked, straddled both. So we're in forestry, so you did research for FIDCO. So anything new and then research that is being done, you're literally doing it for FIDCO and forestry at the same time. So you had those two going. So by this time now, Keats Hall and Guy Sands had moved over as managing director and deputy over FIDCO. So Roy Jones was now director of forestry, the position that was called Conservator of Forests. So I went and told him that I got the job at JNIP and I was leaving. And then he asked me, so you want me to put you on secondment? I had no idea what secondment was. So he explained to me, I said, what's that? He said, when you leave in jobs in government, go to another place. Jumper wasn't central government, but a government entity. The forestry department can hold my job for me while I go over there and they give you a time and say you decide whether you are going to be, if are there no fire from the other one. And then you can come back. And I told him, no, thank you very much. I don't want any secondment. I don't want any cushion. If I go with the JNIP and I can't make it, it really don't make sense I come back a forestry because that's a backward step. Because I'd come back into exactly what I said I wanted to move up from. So I never took the secondment. And I tell you, when I was head at forest department, I was anti the secondment movement. People would get upset with me over and over. I said, if you decide you are leaving this job to go for another job, go for the job and do your work over there. Make sure they keep you. So that came from that time. So I went over to JNIP, interesting place. Mrs. McCarthy, Corinne McCarthy was in charge, and worked in agriculture with Norman Prendergast. You must know him, Peter. And then after a while, they had an office they always had an office in Miami, but they had an agriculture person up there. And this one, Hugh Shaw, did something still. He was climbing the roof and fell off. Big man, he wasn't a young man then. So they needed a replacement quickly. Marilyn, can you go? Yes. So I was sent to the Miami office. for a few months just to fill in until they wasn't sure what was happening to Hugh. And then after that, no, came back, and then Hugh decided that he really should retire now. And then I got the transfer to go to the Miami office as the Agriculture Development Officer for North America. So you did New York, you did Canada, so you had to go to those offices. So the main aim there now was promoting, getting persons to come to Jamaica to do investment in agriculture, which is what we're doing when we're in Kingston. But now you are in the office in North America. And it then linked with the one in Kingston. So you had all these sessions. It was during the days when we also were doing those accounts that we used to get the diaspora, we didn't call them diaspora, the Jamaicans even overseas, to open, and you have the A and B account where you set up, and they would invest in like Central Bank and those banks that lost some of their money. But they did a lot about, we did mail.
That's another story, Marilyn.
Yeah, that's another story, right? But as an agriculture personnel, you would then go out into like diaspora and other places and inform people of what you can do in Jamaica. So that I will like a package of investment opportunities, which crops are worth the while, which one you could try in, and what other activities to do. So that went on for about another 8 years. And then they got a new chairman who decided that they were shrinking the overseas offices and they were cutting back on staff in Miami. And you heard this, by the way, somebody from the Kingston office call and tell you, you're seated. Usually when somebody tell you that somebody dead. But they say, your name on the list. I'm like, what? She said, they have a list of the people who they're cutting back on staff. So you got a little introduction that you will be called back home to Kingston to go back in the same position that you were when you left there 8 years ago. I said, why that never make any sense? So went back to Kingston for a little while, right? Resignation. Everybody still on the rail writing. I said, Lord Marilyn, you can't come back. Come back up a foreigner, you'll find something. I went up back and worked with a consultancy company that Mrs. Corinne McCarthy had. And Mason was the guy there, Ken Mason. He was in charge of it in Miami. Then worked there for a little while, but the work wasn't flowing as much as you want. And besides, you know, I'm coming home and going to do consultancy myself, and came home and started doing that, developing some projects that is the JSIF. And JSIF was one of those projects where FAO had a consultancy, and the agriculture AIC, Investment Corporation, that was another project we wrote and set up.
We're running into a time constraint here now. I want you to touch on ethanol. What's your ethanol? Your
when JNIP? Yeah, yes. That was an interesting thing in that.
Because you claim that was one of your most successful projects.
Yes, you get proposals from persons all the while of what it is they want to do. Some come to naught. But then this company from Seattle came up and said they wanted to produce ethanol, and they were getting grapes from Spain. And from that, they would use the alcohol come and set up a plant out behind Shell. Shell, you know, Shell had a place beside Rockfort, yes, cement factory.
Wasn't Irwin Jones involved in ethanol too?
Irwin Jones was involved in that, but Ormsby was also
involved. Yes.
Winston Ormsby was also involved in it. So the Shell entity is what we're working with. So you then put the proposal to Shell, they agree with it. The guy from the US was Maloney, and Issa, he was married to one of the young Issas, right? So the Issas were involved in it. And they literally set up the refinery, the plant out at Rockfort there, and started producing the ethanol. So long before we were in the E10 and everything else, they started producing ethanol. And that Shell was operating, and that's how Irwin and Ormsby. And they started looking at other sources of fuel, of alcohol, besides importing it from Spain. So that was really one. You know, when you took something on, in my portfolio when I was at JNIP, it used to have alternative energy sources.
Yes.
So anything that alternative products. So you will have things like soya bean, which was not important, which was not key. Alternate energy things that were not your normal traditional agricultural crops. Those were the ones that I managed.
Didn't we ever use our sugar cane in the ethanol?
Yes, yes, because Irwin was there. They started talking to Duckenfield people.
Yes.
Out there, and that was fun. I don't know what's happened to that now. I must find out. I must ask Armsby. As I see Armsby, must ask Armsby.
Yeah. So, all right, quickly, how did you get back as a conservator for forests? How did that happen?
So when I was working with that company, my man decided it wasn't working. I came back to Jamaica now. I was doing the consultancies, and I got a call one day. Somebody knew and said, Dr. Brown is going to call you because Mr. Jones is going to retire next year, and they're looking at conservator. And she was working at FAO at the time, or she was used to work. And she said, and I tell them that you are here, and they didn't know you were here. This is Garnet Brown. So she said, okay, listen up for Dr. Brown. When Dr. Brown call you, you're going to tell him yes. I said, yeah, okay, let us hear. So he called. He said, Marilyn, I heard you're here and thing, and we want to interview you. I said, yeah, man, we can do that. Because his story go back, he used to be one of the senior people in forestry back in the day when Derek Dyer was the Conservator of Forests. And he then shifted and worked with Yale University while I was just a regular forester there. And he brought down some postgraduate students. And he said, Marilyn, Guy Sims assigned me to them. And we took them everywhere. We took them up to the Blue Mountain Peak that day, went overnight, stayed at Portland Gap, took them up to the peak, came back, brought them back down, got a vehicle, and we took them to Hellshire Beach. They were flattened because they said, I'm 7,000 to 0. And but they were, Garnet was saying, he always telling about it, how his students and the professors, everybody was talking about it. So when he came back to Jamaica was working, he called. So he interviewed, and I said, yes. And then he said, well, you have to go and interview now with Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis was cabinet secretary. So he interviewed and he said, yes, and he gave me some instructions. Forest, you need to come out to the jump, the man in the rum bar, you need to be on the place, and you need to get them in the front page here, but not as much as you do like you're at Jam Pro. I said, okay. He said, I want to sit up on the front page every day, but people need to know about forest department. You can't just be there and people don't know. And that way, I got the job. Actually, I got 2 jobs at that time because my same friend was talking to me. She was at FAO as the local representative, but she got a job with ECA in Barbados. So I applied for that job too at FAO. One day, the FAO man, so when I got the job, Carlton Davis, not to tell anybody because they have to tell the PS and they have to process everything. The man from FAO called me and said, Marilyn, we were offering you the job here, but I was at a cocktail party and I heard you got the job as conservator. I said, you did what? I got the job? He said, yes, don't tell anybody I told you. But I know it would be better if you take that job because ours is just, it's an international job and thing, but you don't have head of the thing. So I said, yeah, I will take the forestry one, but and leave the FAO one. So then I started as the Conservator of Forests in November 4th, 1996. And I said, I stayed there for a few years and then I'll go on. When I was on that course that I was telling about Carlton Davis, he said to me, I know you plan to leave here after 6 years, but you have plenty more work to do. He just said the plane. And I was there until 2019.
Whoa.
Yeah. Interesting days, I tell you. When you run in forest department, it's like different from when you're working here as a staff. There's so many things that, the changes that you have to take place, move everybody out of thinking that this is just me and the trees, you have people. So that's how we get the local groups to set up. And you then had to train the foresters to think of people as part of the program and not just hug up the trees like we used to the first time. You have to involve the people. So we had a good local group extension activity going on where we get everybody involved.
Well, Marlene, this has been a substantial interview, right? I mean, it is beyond my expectation, the breadth of experiences that you have had. And Sister Stephanie is smiling right now, right? Because, her investment in you from Holy Childhood has been well done.